The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.
More than 75% of adults in Ontario have now had their first COVID-19 vaccine, and eligibility for second doses will be open to virtually everyone by the end of the month. Tonight, what does that mean we can and can't do? And is the light at the end of the tunnel finally here? Then an update from our Northeastern Ontario hub on the legal battle over St. Anne's Residential School. And from global lessons from the pandemic to reforming capitalism, we've got the Agenda's Week in Review. I'm Nam Kiwanuka. It's Friday, June 18th, and that's ahead on the agenda. Ontario's vaccine rollout may have gotten off to a slow and rocky start, but despite ongoing issues with booking vaccine appointments, more than 12 million doses have now been administered province-wide, and increasingly that includes people with 2 doses. With us now on what it all means, especially for the summer ahead in Mississauga, Ontario, Dr. Zain Chagla, Associate Professor in the Department of Medicine at McMaster University and an infectious disease specialist at St. Joseph Healthcare, Hamilton. And in the provincial capital, Ashley Chute, infectious disease epidemiologist at U of T's Dalla Lana School of Public Health. And Maria Sundaram, infectious disease epidemiologist at ICES, formerly known as the Institute for Clinical Evaluative Sciences. Hi, welcome to you all.
Thank you. Hi.
This has been, there's a lot of hope out there right now. The summer is upon us, the weather is great, people are getting double vaccinated. And Dr. Chagla, I wanted to start with you, just because you're in my former town of Mississauga, Ontario. No, that's how it's been set up. But Dr. Chagla, the Delta variant has slowed the reopening plans for the UK. They were actually supposed to reopen this weekend, and now they've extended, they're now going to be reopening until, I believe, July 19th. And Theresa Tam has warned us to be cautious when it comes to the reopening plans that we have, not just for Ontario, but for the whole of the country. I don't seem to be getting that sense of urgency. As I mentioned, summertime, people are on the patios, the weather is nice. How worried should we be about the Delta variant?
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously this throws another wrench into everything in terms of us, knowing what COVID-19 is going to look like long term and the evolution of how this spreads. But, this is a very different position than when the Alpha variant or B.1.1.7 was circulating. We have vaccines, numbers are much better. I think there is a lot more hope in that context. Certainly, I think we do need to mass vaccinate our population aggressively. And there's been an incredible amount of effort going into getting second doses in individuals, knowing that the efficacy is much higher for a second dose as compared to a first dose. There is certainly a need to be careful with reopening and monitoring particularly hotspots for Delta variant and making sure vaccinations and testing are appropriate there. But again, the UK gives us a window. Recall they're relatively open still. What was going to happen next week was, their so-called Freedom Day, where things go back to 2019 levels. They've been able to show us that the Delta variant on the back of a partially vaccinated population, on the back of more controls coming out of society, that there may be transmission, and that may translate into hospitalizations and healthcare utilization. For us, as we're starting to escalate back into that, yeah, it gives us pause, making to be ready to get to each level and monitoring at each level going forward. And I think the last bit that's missed in all of this is that there is a disproportionate amount of the Delta variant that is affecting those that are not vaccinated. And some populations we obviously can't vaccinate in children under the age of 12, but even in those populations that are not vaccinated, they are seeing the largest burden of the Delta variant. And it is going to happen here in Canada and Ontario. And part of our strategy in the next 2 months is really reaching those hard to reach populations, as they're going to be the ones represented in healthcare.
Maria, Dr. Chagla mentioned children. We are going to be talking about them in a few moments, but he also mentioned hotspots. So this past Monday, the vaccine eligibility was moved up for people who had the AstraZeneca vaccine. And there seemed to be a lot of activism on the ground, a lot of doctors speaking up about the need for, as Dr. Chagla said, for people to get 2 doses. I was lucky enough to log on by 8 o'clock, and some people weren't so lucky. My husband logged on maybe an hour later, and we live in Scarborough, which is a hotspot, but the suggestion was for him to travel to Orillia. And I also saw on social media, Mississauga, there wasn't any place in Mississauga where people could go within that city to get the vaccines. So obviously there are some problems still with booking vaccines. Should people just take the first appointment they can get no matter where it is, if it's in a hotspot or not?
This is a really great question. Unfortunately, the answer is a little longer, but I'll try to be concise. So overall, the answer is yes. If you can get a second dose, you should get a second dose. You may have seen that NACI just released guidance yesterday suggesting that for those who got the first dose as an AstraZeneca vaccine, they ideally would get an mRNA vaccine for their second dose. That might not be possible or accessible to everyone. It's really challenging, though, to tell people, hey, we prefer that you get an mRNA vaccine, because then it feels like if the second dose has to be AstraZeneca, they feel like they're not getting the best possible result. And that's also a problem. You kind of alluded to this issue of accessibility in hotspots, and I think that really comes back to vaccine equity conversations that we were having for the first dose, even back to February. We're seeing now, based on data from ICES, that unfortunately we're seeing the same equity problems with dose 2 as we saw for dose 1. This is not perhaps terribly surprising because, first of all, the people who are eligible for dose 2 already got their dose 1 a while ago. Those were the people who kind of had access in the beginning. But we still have these rollout logistical challenges with getting vaccine to the neighborhoods that really need it the most. So I think in many ways, we're just kind of like, with each new page that we turn in this pandemic, there's a new challenge, but it's a challenge that's also hopefully not unfamiliar to us. And we really need to start taking those challenges, especially the ones with vaccine equity, very seriously.
Like Dr. Chagla said, we can look to the UK to learn some of these lessons. And we know what the rollout for the first dose was like. So you would think that maybe for this second dose, things would be changing. Again, I want to ask you, maybe I want to reframe my question, because we've had this message from the government and from health officials saying, don't travel to other regions, when we did have the stay-at-home order. And now we're being offered vaccines that are, you might be in a hotspot, but then you're getting a vaccine, but that's not in a hotspot. So should you still really be doing that? Should we be doing that?
That's a tough question to answer. I would say my guidance and advice for individual people is, if you can get a second dose, you should. I totally agree with Dr. Chagla's, thought that, we really need to get second doses into people, especially with exploding variants of concern. We know that the vaccine effectiveness post-second dose, especially for those variants, is much better than for just the first dose alone. And I really hope that also helps people feel a little bit more comfortable as things do start to open up sort of simultaneously. But it's really challenging to issue guidance saying, hey, we prefer that you get an mRNA vaccine as your second dose if you got AstraZeneca as your first dose, and then not make that option available to people. So that also really does need to happen.
Ashley, I wanted to follow up with you. Maria mentioned that NACI changed the guidance and said that if you did get an AstraZeneca vaccine, that it's preferred to get the second, an mRNA. Why did they change their position?
So I think they changed it based on a couple of things. The main one is supply. At this point, we have enough of the mRNA vaccines that we can offer mRNA vaccines to anybody who wants it. And we have data, not all of the data that we would necessarily want in terms of, we don't have population studies where we've gone out and done this and sort of looked at the effectiveness of a mixed dose regimen versus 2 AstraZeneca doses. But we have some studies looking at antibodies and the antibody response in people who have received first dose AstraZeneca, second dose mRNA. And the data that we have suggests that the response looks better in people who have that mixed dose. So, the combination of, the mixed AstraZeneca first, mRNA second doesn't look worse. We have abundant mRNA vaccines right now, and we know that there is that risk of VIT with the AstraZeneca vaccine that we don't have with mRNA. So based on that constellation of sort of supply issues as well as emerging data, that's really, I think, pushed us towards recommending that people do get a second dose of mRNA vaccine if it's possible. But again, I think it's really important to remember as we have this discussion and as we've had these discussions, over the past several months, is that, the advice that was given 2 months ago or a month ago wasn't wrong advice at the time. It's just that our situation is changing. We're sort of providing vaccine guidance during the course of a pandemic. And so we have emerging data, we have different changes in terms of supply. We have, 2 months ago, we were in the midst of a very bad third wave, and we really just wanted everybody to get vaccinated as quickly as possible. So as much as this can feel frustrating and overwhelming to have this changing data and, people may be feeling like they didn't get the best vaccine, the reality is that all of these vaccines are highly effective for preventing severe outcomes. And, we're making these changes based on the changing realities on the ground.
I was going to ask you that because there are people who've had 2 doses of AstraZeneca. And I'm thinking that, yes, we worked with the science that we had at the time. But if that's the vaccine that you had, maybe you are feeling a little bit more stressed. Maybe you don't feel as safe as other people who've had the mRNA vaccines. What would you say to those people?
I would say that, based on the data that we have right now, 2 doses of AstraZeneca are highly effective for preventing hospitalizations and mortality. And the reality is that's what really matters the most. They seem to be less effective for preventing symptomatic infection. But, if you are infected but don't go on to develop those severe outcomes, we sort of defanged the virus, which is not to say that, having a symptomatic infection is nothing. It matters. And, that's important. But, you are very well protected against the worst outcomes of infection. And the other piece to this is, as we have more data, as we sort of study the longer term protection that people have from these vaccines, we may have data suggesting that people who receive 2 doses of AstraZeneca, or even people who receive 2 doses of mRNA vaccine, do need a booster. And, that will be provided, and that guidance will, be provided over time. But right now, people are protected, and they should feel good about having 2 doses in their arms.
While the WHO has approved the AstraZeneca vaccine, the FDA in the United States hasn't. And I know you've heard this story this past week. Producers of an upcoming Broadway show said that if you have received the AstraZeneca vaccine, you're not welcomed. Only if you've received an FDA-approved vaccine like Pfizer, Moderna, or the J&J. Dr. Chagla, is this something that we should have foreseen? And again, what do you say to people who received the AstraZeneca vaccine?
Yeah, I mean, if you could tell Generation X, that their choice to take AstraZeneca was any worse, this didn't help in that sense.
It's Springsteen.
The reality is, I know, exactly. It's just on one thing on top of another. Again, it's interesting about this U.S. situation because the only reason AstraZeneca wasn't approved wasn't necessarily because of an efficacy issue. It was simply because at the time they had approved Moderna, Pfizer, and the Janssen vaccine, and the signal towards blood clotting with the AstraZeneca vaccine, and eventually the Janssen vaccine showed up. And so there was no market for it to really come onto the U.S. market, and it never really was approved. It does start the broader discussion, though, right? I think we are, as much as we think that vaccine passports aren't coming, there is going to be a need for vaccine, assurance as part of entry, at least into borders, but even more than that. Unfortunately, some of these discussions may be arbitrary. One country may use a certain vaccine, but not use another based on what they've approved and what they have access to. remember, globally, these vaccines have had inequitable access. Some countries, very minimal access through COVAX to have a set of vaccines. And so I think we do have to give pause. We do have to go through a standardization process, and the World Health Organization is starting to standardize vaccines, both from the typical drug manufacturers from China, from Russia, from India. And, I think that does start the broader discussion of what we think is fully immunized. And we can't really discriminate people for not getting a preferred vaccine, but still doing their part to get the first vaccine available. We do have to make sure there's some equity out there, and that's really up to our federal and provincial leaders to regulate it.
And Maria, Health Minister Christine Elliott said this past week that guidelines were coming of what people can and can't do now that they've been vaccinated. Well, I've also heard from viewers, seniors who've said that they weren't able to get a vaccine because they're immunocompromised, but they don't know what to do. How important is that discussion, communicating what we can and cannot do if we are vaccinated or not vaccinated?
I think it's incredibly important, and if only because it's something that people really want to know. But it's also really helpful to say, hey, here, if you're fully vaccinated, here are the things that you can do safely. You can, for example, theoretically hang out in an indoor environment with another fully vaccinated person. That's a low risk interaction. So hopefully that will be a component of these guidelines. I do think it's really helpful for people to have that written down. I don't think it's fair for us to say, well, just use your best judgment. Not all of us are infectious disease epidemiologists, and some of us just really need to, we want to see the guidance. That being said, what I'm concerned about is using full vaccination as an incentive for freedom at this point, because we've seen so many challenges, again, with vaccine equity, on a local level, but also on a global level, that if we say, hey, if you're fully vaccinated, here's all the things you can do, that's going to feel really terrible to people who haven't had the access to that second dose yet.
And of course, you mentioned children before. Ashley, I wanted to follow up with that because, we've been talking about vaccinations protecting us against the Delta variant. But that doesn't mean that you can't still get COVID even if you're vaccinated. But children under 12 can't be vaccinated yet. How worried should we be about getting this under control if none of the vaccines are approved for children under the age of 12?
Yeah, no, it's a really important question. And it's something that I think becomes more and more important as we have more of the population vaccinated and as we start having these conversations about opening up and having freedoms. Because, it's not just children, it's also people who, haven't been vaccinated for various other reasons. And, when we start talking about what people can do when they're fully vaccinated, it starts shifting responsibility towards the individual. And, there's this sense, well, you've been vaccinated, you get this reward, which on the one hand is appropriate because we do want people to get vaccinated and we do want them to be able to understand that vaccine does provide them with those freedoms. But we also have to understand that we're talking about a communicable disease. And we do have pockets of our population who are vulnerable and who, can't shift that responsibility onto them. And kids, I think it's a perfect example of that, where, come the next couple months, as we start opening up and as I think, we start talking about the return to school in the fall, we have a highly vulnerable group of people who are going to be spending time indoors in classrooms without the benefits amongst the younger kids of being vaccinated. And so if we, don't get COVID numbers down to really low levels, via vaccination and via, I think this cautious reopening, which is really important, then we have to be aware of the fact that there's the potential come the fall that we have really large outbreaks happening in kids and in other unvaccinated population groups. And, I think, the conversation around schools and kids is highly polarized. But the reality is that this is a novel infectious disease and there's no immunity in our population, which is why we had, a pandemic. But, if we allow this to spread sort of without public health measures in place in kids, we can expect to see large numbers of people getting infected. And, some of those kids are going to have bad outcomes. So I think we need to be aware of the fact that just because we reach these vaccination milestones, this pandemic hasn't gone away, and it's not going to go away for a while. And so we really need to be focused not only on those vaccination targets, but also on, what's happening with transmission in our communities and in these pockets of vulnerable people.
Maria, I saw you nodding your head.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think the big thing that I agree with you, Ashley, on is that this discussion has really been highly polarized, which I think is a little unfortunate because, of course, as you mentioned, the most important thing is we need to make sure that all of us are protected. And if we have this large group of people in our population, children, who can't be protected by a vaccine, we can very much expect that that pathogen will move through that group that's not protected. And we know that children can get severe disease. And we also know that they are what's called high degree nodes in contact networks. They tend to have a lot of people that they interact with. And that also means a lot for us in terms of infectious disease protection. So yeah, I agree with everything that you said.
It's been interesting to see this discussion with around schools and patios. I think when the government decided to open patios on social media, it was kind of like, and we're having these kind of conversations I don't think we ever imagined we would have like 2 years ago, trying to decide who do you see in your social circle? Do you have 1 dose, 2 dose, no dose? How do you ask those questions? And Dr. Chagall, we look at the US, and the CDC recommended that they don't need to wear a mask anymore. Is not wearing a mask possible in our near future here?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I think, working in a healthcare environment, I don't know if we're going to get rid of masks very quickly, for what they've done for preventing nosocomial transmission of not just COVID-19, but other respiratory pathogens. As much as we, don't like them in certain contexts, they may have a universal good there, and it may be one of the settings where it gets enshrined. Is there a pathway out of masks? Yeah, I think so at some point in time. But as was mentioned, children in schools, particularly next year, they're a vulnerable population. It could very well still spread through, and masking may need to be a part of that, really, as a mitigation technique, as well as things like ventilation and adequate class sizes to support children being in schools and not leading to outbreaks and disruptive learning. From a societal standpoint, I think we do need to maintain masks, particularly because there are such risk gradients amongst people, at least until we have a significant threshold of adults and the ones that could be overrepresented in healthcare really immunized, such that, at least we don't see the masks coming off as a large transmission event. And, I think we look at the United States, many of us in envy, I think, watching the basketball and hockey playoffs now, seeing full stadiums and saying, well, why can't we get to that? We're barely even allowed to be indoors with people. And, again, that is also the cost of a large vaccine campaign, but also a large number of people that derived natural immunity the hard way while getting infected. The combination of the two puts them slightly ahead of us in terms of vaccine efficacy and population immunity. And so, we are still a ways away back from then, although heading in that direction carefully, without necessarily having the secondary damage from how much transmission they had during their first 3 waves.
And Ashley, last week, and we saw a lot of patios brimming because that is something that we can now do. Is there a risk that people will, maybe forget about the precautions that we had, and this is happening too soon?
I mean, there's always a risk, right? It's not something that really worries me, to be perfectly honest. I think, the fact that we're doing this slowly, we're doing things primarily outdoors, the indoor shopping stuff is, to me, relatively low risk. People are wearing masks still. I think, in general, the guidance around taking things outdoors and really, recognizing that outdoors is lower risk has gotten through. And of course, there are people who are going to, push things a little bit farther. And there are going to be people who, start inviting people over to their homes and whatnot. But I think sort of on the sort of population level, I don't really worry about that. I think that the plan that we have right now is good. I think that it's appropriately cautious. And I honestly think that at this point, everybody wants this to be over. And we don't want to be talking about another period of lockdowns or restrictions. And so I think in general, people are slowly and cautiously, loosening their behaviors and sort of recognizing the fact that risk is going down. But I'm not particularly worried that, individual behaviors are going to take us off track. I think if anything, it's going to be the sort of larger plan and, if we rush things too quickly.
And Maria, many businesses are prepping their employees for a return to work. Is there anything they need to consider before calling people back into the office?
I think there's a lot of things they need to consider. And, both my co-panelists kind of made reference to this. The idea that this is kind of an individual level responsibility, I think, is perhaps not really an accurate description of how we want to control infectious diseases and pandemics. We have to think about the systemic structural factors that help people stay safe and also help them follow the guidelines that we can give them. And so this, in terms of workplaces, this includes things like, being flexible for people who still want to work from home or still would prefer to work from home. It includes things like improved ventilation, flexibility for desk placement. But also then I think there's we've seen really consistently throughout this pandemic, a sort of a co-pandemic of mental health challenges. And I think that many people wind up accessing mental health care through their work, through EAP or through other resources. I think it's really important for companies to continue providing those resources and saying, hey, we're not going back exactly to how things were in 2019. We are all different people. And we've all gone through something together. And we need to sort of acknowledge that and continue acknowledging that as we sort of move back from this pandemic and recover.
And Dr. Chegla, I'm going to give you the last 30 seconds. Schools coming up in September. What should schools and the government be doing to prepare for a safe return to school in September?
I mean, number one, preparing now, right? And I think we've been caught flat-footed being too delayed in this. I mean, again, class sizes, improved ventilation, really consideration of a mask policy at that point until community numbers are stable, and trying to minimize the number of days of kids away from school and having a test strategy developed for kids. Those are going to be the pieces of an unvaccinated population that's going to keep them safe until, again, the vaccines start reaching them long term when we get the clinical trial data.
Again, thank you so much. You three are excellent communicators, and whenever you're on the show, we get lots of emails from people saying how much better they feel about knowing this information. Thank you so much for your insights. We appreciate it.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
St. Anne's Residential School operated in Fort Albany in the James Bay Treaty region for most of the last century. And with a terrible discovery in Kamloops of the remains of 215 children, what happened there is under new scrutiny, in addition to long-standing litigation that's still unresolved. Our Northeastern Ontario Hub journalist Nick Dunne has been looking into that, and he joins us now from Sudbury. Hey, Nick.
Hi, Jan.
All right, so let's start by going back a little bit. Can you tell us a little bit about St. Anne's history?
Well, as you said, St. Anne's operated between 1902 and 1976, in part by the Oblates of Mary Immaculate, same Catholic order that ran the Kamloops School. So it was widely considered to be one of the worst residential schools in this country. In one court decision that I talk about, Justice Paul Perel says, some of the worst acts in the residential school system had occurred at this school. So it is a site of a lot of pain for the whole James Bay community.
Now, for your latest for TVO.org, you've written a pretty detailed timeline on the legal process that's been going on between the Canadian government and the survivors there over compensation. How did the legal case get started in the first place?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, kind of in the early 2000s, there were a whole series of civil cases being brought up by residential school survivors. And this led in 2006 to the creation of the Indian Residential School Settlement Agreement. This was done by the federal government, the Assembly of First Nations, Council for Survivors, and various church organizations. Over 38,000 people applied to its various settlement processes, and over $3 billion were doled out. It was the largest settlement in Canadian history.
And now, was St. Anne's included in that compensation? Because I understand as well, the Ontario Provincial Police also did an investigation in the early 90s as well.
Yes. So between 1992 and 1997, there was an OPP investigation into the abuses at St. Anne's. Over 700 people had left some kind of written testimony or oral testimony. It led to the conviction of 6 people, former staff at that school. Now, going fast forward now to 2007, the process begins for compensation. And among the things that these compensation claims involved were what they called school narratives and person of interest reports. These were reports created by the federal government to effectively summarize any allegations or convictions of abuse that had happened at this school. And it wasn't until 2012 that it was discovered by one of the survivors' lawyers that these OPP records, the investigations, over 12,000 pages of testimony, records, filings, and documents weren't included in those key evidentiary documents that adjudicators could review in their claims. So, there were, like well over 160 people who went through those claims without actually having that evidence.
Now, what sort of happened with those OPP documents? I know there's sort of a back and forth with the federal government and the lawyers here. So what do we know about that so far?
Right. So there was a 2014 decision that compelled Canada to produce the documents. It got handed over. They were handed over very loosely, according to court documents. Very redacted. 2015, another court decision was made to unredact those documents for adjudicators, as well as update those narrative and person of interest reports. And they were updated for claimants whose cases were still ongoing. But for those who weren't resolved, or who had been resolved, rather, they've been trying through various means to get those documents to see if they can reassess their claims. But they allege that they have not been able to. And that takes us to 2020, when there was a request by Edmund Matadawabin, former chief of Fort Albany, who's been kind of leading the Survivors Association there. He filed effectively a claim saying that the 166 people whose claims were processed without this evidence should be able to have their claims reheard. And that's what's been going on ever since.
Now, earlier this month, the House of Commons voted on a motion for the government to end this court battle with survivors. What happened there, and where are we at with that so far?
Yeah, so that was on June 7th. It requested a number of things following various Truth and Reconciliation Commission calls to action, ending various litigations with First Nations children and survivors, including St. Anne's. They specifically name that association, and they basically asked the federal government to sit down with the Petabequeway-Kakewin Association, which is the St. Anne's Survivors Association, to end this case, or to find some kind of resolution to it, perhaps outside of court or what have you. Yeah, so that's ongoing. The federal government submitted a progress report on Thursday, effectively laying out, what they've been doing what they've been doing in response, rather, to that motion that the NDP put forward. It has to still be checked over by the Indigenous Affairs Committee within Parliament, but they have submitted that report for the committee.
For your article, you spoke to a lawyer for some insight. What did they have to say about this legal case moving forward?
So I spoke with Jennifer Leach. She's a visiting professor at Osgoode Hall. So she basically said, and her whole article focuses on the conduct and approach government lawyers took in this whole proceeding. And she's following up with another article. I think she described it as a war. The tactics that were being used here, talking about when they had to give these OPP documents over to the Council of Survivors, they were very loose, and she said that's a legal no-no, and that, I think she points out that this process was intended for reconciliation and to, acknowledge, what had happened in these schools, particularly at St. Anne's, which is, especially notable in its abuse of children and the way it has affected that region to this day. I think she says that, obviously there's an obligation for government lawyers to be defending the government. However, at a certain point, perhaps, she suggests that, in the spirit of reconciliation, in light of, what happened at this school, that, the government should ease up and perhaps, come to a settlement.
Something that we will definitely keep a close eye on. Thank you very much, Nick, for this.
Thank you.
The agenda this week heard why capitalism needs a government-led overhaul and assessed Ontario's decision to invoke the notwithstanding clause over its election spending legislation. The agenda's Week in Review begins with CNN's Fareed Zakaria on lessons learned from a global pandemic.
Millions of people on this continent are asking themselves, can we trust the Chinese to give us the straight goods on ... fill in the blanks. How this virus started in the first place would be a good question we'd like to get the answer to. What's your answer in terms of how much we can trust the Chinese to do business with them, to get straight answers from them, to stop stealing our intellectual property, etc.?
It's a very complicated question. It is the question, and you put it in a very interesting way. How much can we trust the Chinese? I'd put it this way. China is a dictatorship. It is in the nature of dictatorships to control information. So there's very little doubt in my mind that the Chinese are being secretive, obstructionist, duplicitous even with regard to the origins of COVID, which may have been an entirely accidental leak from a lab that was working on these viruses in order to come up with vaccines and treatments. But the way this works in a dictatorship, think of Chernobyl, is any mistake has to be covered up. And transparency is the enemy of a dictatorship. So don't expect transparency, don't expect open and free flows and exchanges of information. But that said, China is not Russia. I think this is a very important distinction to make. Russia is kind of a spoiler on the world stage. If you think about the annexation of Crimea and the invasion of Ukraine, this is almost unprecedented since 1945 to literally just march in and take another country's territory. If you think about what it's been doing in Syria, bankrolling really mass murder and slaughter on a scale that is breathtaking. If you think about what it is doing in the world of cybercrime, it has at the very least encouraged, if not directed, massive amounts of cybercrime and cyber theft. China is not playing that game. China is trying to rise within the world, gain influence, gain strength, the kind of traditional great power rise. And so there are areas, I think, where one could imagine cooperating with the Chinese. They have kept to their end of the bargain on a lot of things, from climate change to even in trade. There are places where they have certainly cheated, but let's be honest, there are places where the United States, Canada, the European Union also fudged the rules. China has not proved to be an outlier in those areas. It is a responsible country that makes commitments and keeps up to them. But don't expect them to behave like a liberal democracy with regard to something like information. They're not.
Let's pivot to the Middle East here now, Fareed. And to that end, I want to quote something that you wrote recently in the Washington Post, where you wrote, "It has been the same way for decades. Every time violence between the Israelis and Palestinians erupts, governments around the world urge de-escalation, a ceasefire agreement is reached, and experts warn that the situation cannot continue like this. But it has, and it will. Ultimately, this is not a problem that can be resolved through power, whether political or military. It can only be resolved through moral persuasion." I do want to ask you about the new government in Israel that was just created the other day. Benjamin Netanyahu, the prime minister of the last decade or more, 12 years, I guess, is now gone. Naftali Bennett is the new prime minister, at least for the next couple of years. Does that, in your view, open up any new possibilities for the Middle East?
Not really. I'll tell you why. Naftali Bennett, who is the new prime minister, is actually to the right of Bibi Netanyahu on the core issue you were just alluding to, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Bennett is the most significant politician in Israel, in Israeli history, to forego even the possibility of a Palestinian state, to argue forthrightly that what Israel should do is annex the West Bank, never allow a Palestinian state. He said that he has killed many Arabs during his time in the Israeli army, and he celebrates that fact. Now, this is not a man about to usher in a Palestinian state or to begin serious negotiations on that front. He has said, to be fair, that he will give up his dreams to pursue this coalition government. But you see what I mean? It's very unlikely that you're going to get more movement from him than you were from Bibi Netanyahu. Look, the reality is, and this is what I was trying to describe in that column, everybody has been trying to kind of force Israel into making concessions to the Palestinians and to scare them by saying, otherwise there'll be terrorism, otherwise the Arabs won't like you and you'll never have peace with the Arabs, otherwise you won't be able to prosper on the world stage. All those predictions have proved wrong. As a simple matter of fact, Israel has managed to build a wall, to build these extraordinary anti-rocket missile systems, and to put in place an intelligence network that is essentially have ended the problem of terrorism in Israel. Even when these rockets fall, they get intercepted. So you can see this in the numbers who die, right? For every one Israeli, 20 Palestinians die in the retaliation. They were told that you won't be able to prosper on the world stage. Israel is being courted by every country in the world for its technological prowess. And countries like India, I grew up in India. India had no relations with Israel when I was growing up. Now, out of necessity, they feel they have to. Russia has forged deep ties with Israel. Again, Russia used to be the biggest bankroller of the Palestinian Liberation Organization. And now even the Arabs are normalizing relations with Israel. So ultimately, the only way this ends is if the Israelis feel like they cannot bear the cost to their conscience of ruling over 4 to 5 million people without giving them political rights.
I guess I should start by saying, Professor, you have set a modest little goal of rethinking capitalism in the hopes that countries worldwide are actually going to do government differently. And I wonder why you didn't find that mission just utterly and completely daunting to set out on.
Well, first of all, when we use the word capitalism, I think we forget that there's different ways to do capitalism. There's varieties of capitalism. And I think we have the wrong one in many countries. And I think the COVID-19 pandemic just completely woke us up to just how badly prepared we are. We weren't even able to produce pretty basic stuff like personal protection equipment, enough of it for frontline workers, at least in the first lockdown. We have a digital divide, which means that so many young people who have been locked down from school have not accessed their human right to education. We have a vaccine, but that's not enough if it's actually not globally accessible. So, in terms of how we produce, how we distribute, but also how we consume, there's huge lessons to learn. And I think, the fact that 51 years ago, we did something incredibly hard as humanity. We put a man on the moon and also brought him, at the time they were all boys, now we're getting girls on the moon, back as well. That was much harder than PPE, but it's actually easier than some of the more kind of social missions. So what I try to do in the book is to say, let's break down what actually got us to the moon in terms of how government and business interacted, how they co-invested, how there was much less ideology. You had a government that was directing the show, but lots of private sector innovation and investment before public goal. And what would it look like to apply that to the 17 Sustainable Development Goals?
Well, we got to the moon in 1970, I guess the Americans got to the moon in 1970, but of course President Kennedy set out the goal almost a decade earlier, and he wanted it done regardless of the cost because he said it was just something we had to do. Do we still think that way today?
Absolutely not. In fact, if you read the different speeches he gave in 61 and 62, the words he used were like, we're going to do it because it's hard, not because it's easy. And we might even screw up along the way. Well, he didn't say screw up, but he said we might make mistakes along the way. It's going to cost a lot of money. So that kind of welcoming of uncertainty, of experimentation, of trial and error, and also having kind of an approach to the budget, which one could call an outcomes-oriented budget, right? You focus on the goal and then you backtrack and say, how much will it cost? And that's just going to be what it costs. But especially setting it up in such an ambitious way, which required investment in innovation in so many different sectors, not just aeronautics. There was innovation in nutrition and materials, electronics, software. The entire software industry was actually a spillover in some ways of that Apollo program. But also, there was failure along the way. So the Apollo 1 tragedy, and those 3 astronauts who died, what was so interesting, well, it's tragic, but still quite interesting, that one of the astronauts, Gus Grissom, before dying on that day, said, how are we going to get to the moon when we can't even communicate between 3 buildings? Because he couldn't hear what was being said to him on the, on the lunar module from the mission control room. And, basically all these kind of government silos and these different kind of parts of government today, which we know don't work together. He was reflecting on that, on how badly NASA within a square kilometer was communicating between its buildings. And that caused a massive shakeup within NASA to actually, think about its own internal structure in order to be what I call mission oriented. And so today, where there's trillions being poured into the system with COVID-19 recovery funds, it's really important to remember that it's not enough to kind of have helicopter money, right? Just have a lot of public money in the system if the actual capacity on the ground within our public institutions isn't fit for purpose. And as Obama once said, the last time we reinvented government was in the era of black and white TV. So instead of just thinking government's part of the problem, or at best it's part of the solution, right? These kind of dichotomous ways of thinking about government, what does it actually mean to have an ambitious government that works hand in hand with the private sector, of course, but to fulfill serious public goals? What does it mean for organizational capacity? What does it mean for actually organizing a partnership that's truly symbiotic and not what I would call parasitic, which is what we often have in the health innovation space, where you have, billions of public funds going in, and then somehow the drugs that are produced, or at least co-produced with public money, aren't accessible to citizens, whether it's because they're overpriced or if the intellectual property rights often get abused. So, a lot of these kind of intricate questions are the ones I think we should be asking on the back of COVID-19, but also, of course, the climate crisis, which is the other massive, crisis that is on top of this current health pandemic.
I am going to follow up on those questions, but I don't want to leave NASA just yet, because there's a story in your book. It's 1962. JFK is touring NASA, and he meets a janitor. And he asked the janitor, what's your job here? And he said, well, Mr. President, I'm helping get a man on the moon. What's the significance of that story?
Well, we should be careful because on the one hand, the significance of that story is that it was a really inspirational mission. I mean, you'll remember also all those pictures of, humans all over the globe looking up, right, at the sky during, the moon landing. On the other hand, there was real tensions on Earth at the time. You'll remember there was, the whole civil rights movement. And people within the civil rights movement arguing, why are we spending billions in space when we have hunger, poverty, and racism on Earth? So it wasn't, exactly a linear process, but it surely was a period where we had much more leadership. In some ways, there was also more debate, less also the ideological debate than we have today. But one of the points I make is that even those who believe in government, forget the kind of Reaganite, Thatcherite kind of view of government, just get out of the way. Even those who believe in it continue, some of the progressive economists too, to talk about it as just, fixing market failures. And what was interesting at the time of Apollo is that it was a real example of what I've been speaking about for some time, even on your show, which is we need governments that co-create and co-shape markets to fulfill goals and actually achieve an economy that's more inclusive and sustainable.
Is it right for the government of the day, as the Wynne government did, as the Ford government is doing, to set the rules of the game in which they are clearly about to participate? What do you say?
Yeah, no, I mean, the CCLA opposed the Kathleen Wynne bill and the limits put in there, and we said that before the legislative committee. We were ready to challenge that law as an intervener when it was going to the court, and then we ended up intervening on the matter that it was heard by Justice Morgan. Parliament never gets the last word, but it gets the word, and it is going to be controlled by the majority. Yes, it does seem unfair, and it could lead to things like gerrymandering, which is why ideally what would happen is that we do with spending limits what we do with the actual constituency boundaries, which is we create a third-party mechanism, such as having Elections Ontario, an independent body, hear from all the parties as to why we ought to have a limit at whatever it is, 100, 1,000, 100,000, a million, and then you get an independent say. It's similar to what Duff is arguing for. It's just a little bit more like the CRTC and setting prices around what you can charge people. It would be a similar idea, but even then you would put that into place and then that could be overturned. So some of this is, in fact, democratic. The question is whether or not it's constitutional and whether or not a government can do this to its benefit. The problem being that under the Charter of Rights, the democratic rights under sections 3 to 5 cannot be subject to the notwithstanding clause, along with, for example, the mobility rights. And the idea was that the framers of the Constitution said, look, there should be some things that are off limits for parliaments to overturn courts. And I would say that this falls into that category, but it's not self-evident because those sections were not pled in the case. But I think that would be the argument for it, and that would mean that governments have to comply with the Charter of Rights and not get the last word. Why? Because that's what our Constitution says, and you would need a constitutional amendment to change that.
Well, Michael, you've mentioned the framers of the Constitution, and I happen to be sitting in a studio right now named after one of them. I'm in the William G. Davis studio at TVO, which was created by Bill Davis when he was Education Minister. And I can't help but remember that in the middle 1970s, when this issue came up, he appointed a committee of conservatives, liberals, and New Democrats, and then gave the job, I believe, of overseeing election expenses to the former head of the New Democratic Party, Donald MacDonald, to deal with this. It was an all-party solution to a situation where all parties were affected. And Jason, I guess I'm going to put this question to you. That seemed like a pretty good idea 45 years ago. Why isn't it today?
Yeah, it's a good question. I've got a lot of sympathy for that, and the points that Michael's making in terms of some sort of not the CRTC, Michael. The CRTC doesn't have the best
fair.
Something like this, the CRTC, where you get a group of sort of wise people who get together and do it in a nonpartisan way. But I think, Steve, it's a reasonable question. But the question really is, do we want more money in politics? Like that's actually what this is trying to do. So there are, like Michael's arguing, civil liberties. Duff's are arguing something slightly different. The Teachers Federation, God bless them. I understand why you're arguing. You want to run a lot of ads in the upcoming ads. Groups like Ontario Proud and Doug Ford. I don't think it's self-evident, by the way, that this advantaged Doug Ford. There's a lot of right-wing groups like Jenny and I could have run an arms race here and got a bunch of people to donate millions of dollars and run pro-Doug Ford ads as well. That's off the table as well. There's a maximum there as well. Ontario Proud spent a lot of money. I think they were the top spender in the last election campaign in 2018. They're going to be sort of hamstrung and hobbled down to $600,000. So, Steve, I think your idea is actually, it's a great question on why you don't do that. But the fundamental question is, do we want more money or less? Do we want this kind of arms race? Do we want more attack ads? And I grew up in Southern Ontario. All I got, no cable. All I got was Buffalo, Detroit over the airwaves. In election season, all it is attack ads on sheriff, on governor, on whatever. And do we want more of that or don't we? And that's really the fundamental question that we're looking at here.
I'd like to get Karen to speak to that because, in fact, the government House Leader, Paul Calandra, in recalling the legislature, it's he who is responsible for doing that, said that the new legislation is intended to protect the individual rights of Ontario voters and protect our elections from American-style super PACs and their big money political influence. That's what they say is at the heart of this, Karen. Do you have reason to dispute that?
You know, that's ridiculous. Super PACs, no. The power of super people in Ontario coming together to hold this government accountable is more like it. This is absolutely nothing like American-style politics. There were limits in place. I'm not arguing that there shouldn't be limits. Limits were in place, but for a government to arbitrarily just change those limits, to restrict voice, to restrict the amount of dialogue that we can engage with our members, the amount of issues that we can hold this government accountable for over that time, over a year of dialogue, of engaging in robust conversation. This is what it's about. It's about, in essence, the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, freedom of speech and freedom of expression. This is not a democratic crisis for this government to come in and to impose a notwithstanding clause. This is really to stifle the voice of Ontarians, to restrict really legitimate criticism about the track record of this government.
That's just some of what we covered this week on The Agenda. For more, including the full conversations, you can visit our website, tvo.org, our YouTube channel at youtube.com/theagenda, or our Twitter feed, twitter.com/theagenda. And that's it for this Friday, June 18th, 2021. Monday is National Indigenous Peoples Day. We'll hear from accomplished Indigenous architects about building sustainable and beautiful connections to the land. I'm Nam Kiwanuka. Thank you for watching TVO and for joining us online at tvo.org. Have a great weekend, and we'll see you on Monday.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism. Ontario Hubs are made possible by the Barry and Laurie Green Family Charitable Trust and Goldie Feldman.